Good evening and a very warm welcome to the viewers from all over the world. For those of you who are experiencing us for the first time, the CEO's Chair is a unique program where we showcase inspiring stories of successful CEOs. We not only give you an insight into their mindset, but we also help you discuss their challenges and help understand their definitions of success and leadership. Today, we have one such inspiring story with us, Vikram Gupta, founder, managing partner at IvyCap Ventures. Welcome to the show, Vikram.
Thank you for having me, Siddharth.
So Vikram, while some of the audience members, and we've got audience members from all over the world, I think most of them will know your profile, but for the rest, I just wanted to cover a brief history of your professional journey so far. You graduated from IIT Delhi. You have over 2 decades of global experience in private equity, mergers and acquisitions, as well as business consulting. You work with global organizations such as IBM, where you conceptualize their healthcare and life sciences division. You've been an entrepreneur in healthcare, tech, as well as consumer sectors. And you were also the founding member of a $100 million healthcare-focused private equity fund in 2008 when the entire world's finances were going through a turmoil. So Vikram, first of all, just a quick check-in, the lockdown, the pandemic, how are you handling that personally as well as your family? I hope everybody's safe.
Yes, fortunately, everybody at home and extended family and friends, at least whoever I know, even portfolio companies, their employees. Fortunately, everybody is safe and healthy at this time.
Good to hear, Vikram. Vikram, if I wanted to ask you that, how has this personally affected, the work that you do, the industry that you're in? I'm sure nobody planned for this, and here we are 2 months in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there has been a change, and of course, and I think that almost everybody out there, not just in Mumbai, but across the world, I think I've seen this substantial change in the way people are doing their day-to-day lives.
Correct.
And in my personal life, of course, on the work side, I have seen actually the number of hours that actually go into work has increased.
Okay.
Quite substantially, in fact. Earlier I used to have clearly Saturdays and Sundays. Saturdays, Sundays are kind of get merged into the work hours. And, I get to spend a lot more time with my portfolio companies these days.
Okay.
A lot of work happening. Even they are finding this new way of working very, very productive. And, even interactions with LPs, our investors, the fund, potential investors, and everybody is getting used to this way of interaction. And, actually, in that sense, we are noticing quite a substantial increase in productivity of work.
Okay.
It's actually the positive side to it. The other side also, which is very positive, is I get to spend a lot more time with family.
That's always good.
Yes, a lot more time one can allocate with the family, so which is definitely a plus point. And plus, I do sneak out some time here and there for my music. I love to sing and do some songs, and I just try to find some time in between to record some songs. So. Yeah, so that's this. Basically, I'm seeing, each hour in the day is becoming more and more productive, whether it's the personal front or on the work front.
Correct. So would you say that you've always been a very organized person, or is this something that has been enforced over the last couple of months because of this lockdown?
No, actually, it's not just the last few months. I think you can't really get to a point in your career unless you're an organized person.
Very true.
I would say that maybe I wouldn't say I was always organized, but I started getting very organized somewhere in the mid of my career. Prior to that, I was not as organized as I should have been. But, of course, over time, I've become organized. And then when you become an entrepreneur, it's a very interesting combination of being completely disorganized and being organized. Because everything looks unstructured, haywire. You have to bring structure out of that, and that's where unless your mind thinks in an organized way,
correct,
get lost in that chaos. And I mean, I've seen entrepreneurs who really succeed actually put a very good structure to their thinking, and they put structure to the chaos around them.
And I think that's a very valid point, Vikram, that you bring up, that whether it is a lockdown or regardless, it is the outcomes that you're able to achieve, or it's the results that you're able to get, regardless of the time that you spend on the project.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So that's exactly, it's also about, the efficiency of those hours, right? I mean, it's not just the number of hours. Many times people confuse between, number of hours spent and the quality of those hours.
True.
I've seen people who would spend very little time, but will come out with the best outcome in those hours. And I've seen people who would be spending hours and hours on certain things and still not. So it really depends on how best you can make use of.
Of course. I wanted to talk about a very interesting time in your professional journey when you made the transition from a corporate leader to becoming an entrepreneur and becoming an investor. I know you were working with IBM for, I think, almost close to 5 years.
Correct.
So what sparked that transition? Was there a catalyst or an incident that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, I was in the US. I went to the US for a 1-year MBA at Case.
Okay.
And the reason I chose that was Cleveland was the hub for consulting. At that time, my mind was totally about, I wanted to get into consulting.
Okay.
And, fortunately, I had a few people who were alumni of my college who were there. And I got to talk to them, and I told them I'm trying to get into consulting and I don't want to spend too much time. I mean, is there a way I can just do something in 1 year and still find a good job in consulting? So Cleveland turned out to be the best place for that, where McKinsey, for example, had the largest office, and almost every consulting firm used to come and recruit. And that's how I ended up joining IBM from campus, and then worked with IBM for almost 5 years. And, the challenge which is there in the US, and people who've lived in the US would understand this, when you're working on an H-1B visa, and if you do have entrepreneurial aspirations, you really can't do much. You have to really continue to work for a period of time. And
Very true.
The other challenge is that, for any reason, if you're laid off, and I think this is one challenge. We're talking about post 2001, and I'm talking about 2000 to 2005 time frame. I was there, and lots of layoffs were happening, and I was probably one of the survivors, of the 150,000 people that they had hired in my batch. And every time a layoff was happening, there was a sword hanging on my head. So that was a very stressful time. And by the time, after around 5 years, they had just started my green card process. And I said it was going to take another 5 years to get that green card and then start thinking about entrepreneurship. So I said, I really don't think one should wait for that long. And therefore, that was the trigger point for me to move back to India.
Okay.
Thinking of something on my own.
Very nice. And that's where I believe IvyCap Ventures came into being. Is that correct?
IvyCap Ventures came much later. In fact, that was a trigger point for me to move back to India. Actually, entrepreneurship was in my mind at that time. I moved back to India, and that was the first time I realized that how naive I was. Everything was kind of happening in multiple dimensions, moving countries and getting into entrepreneurship for the first time.
True.
Very little capital, no team, and trying to do an idea which was a new industry of its own. It was medical tourism, and at that time was actually very heavily trying to get into that, and the government was supporting that. So I picked that idea, and I thought I will be able to, because coming from the Western world, India being a healthcare spot, I could bring cross-border patients from the US or other countries, and then really help the Indian ecosystem to really build up like that. But I think it was a little early, I would say, ahead of its time. The idea itself was a little ahead of its time, and then I learned lots of other things of entrepreneurship at that time.
I'm sure sometimes the best lessons in life come, unfortunately, the hard way.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
Vikram, you yourself don't come from, and if I may say so, very well-to-do family originally.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were times when money was not, easily accessible as well.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about the importance of, keeping your head or just understanding the resources that you have at your disposal when you're starting out on an entrepreneurial journey? Because I think entrepreneurship now has become very cool. There are a lot of colleges that are offering degrees in entrepreneurship. A
Yeah.
lot of kids want to get into entrepreneurship without knowing, I would say, the darker side of entrepreneurship as well.
No, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, when I started IvyCap in 2011,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I had almost no capital left of my own. I had no savings, almost zero
Okay.
savings at that time. And primarily because before that, I had tried my own ventures and even funded a couple of ventures,
Mm-hmm.
my savings. And when I really decided to do it, and it was actually, I would say, blessing in disguise at that time, because the fund which was managing for Ajay Piramal at that time, their healthcare business got acquired by Abbott for a fairly large value.
Mm-hmm.
And, that fund really had to be then kind of, had a very different meaning at that time. So I kind of decided to move on. And by that time, I thought that I had understood the game, and if I could raise a fund in 2008 time, I
Correct.
had almost about $100 million at that time. Uh, uh, I had a lot of confidence in myself that I could go to the market and raise funds. But I think, to your question, of course, despite the fact that I had almost negative balance in my bank, I actually decided that let me at least go and try this out. Otherwise, I will never be able to forgive myself knowing that I wanted to do this. And maybe 10 years later, if I ask this question, why didn't I try it? At least I would have,
No, no regrets.
yeah, no regrets. So I think I would say that, the idea which I started with
Mm-hmm.
itself had, a lot of value. In fact, and that worked quite well.
Okay.
Then I was quite fortunate to be able to support it by the first few people itself that I reached out to. That also worked very well in favor. Even though, I mean, I was quite naive even at that time to think that, I had planned my own finances
Correct.
even after raising loan against my own house. I actually raised money just to survive for 8 months so that I could survive for 6 months, and then for another 2 months, I look for a job and go back to the job market if it doesn't succeed. So I was naive that I'll be able to raise a fund, first fund of your own in 6 to 8 months time frame. But I think things happened in a way that, uh, things worked out very well. So I would say that in retrospect, it was a very, very, I would say, tough decision. And would I have taken the same decision if I think back today? Maybe I'm not sure, because honestly, it doesn't necessarily work always. And at that time, the venture capital market was relatively new.
Correct.
And, I was fortunate to get that initial set of people on board.
Okay.
Actually made a huge difference. So I think it's a pretty. I mean, I feel very lucky actually that one thing happened after the other, and within a year of starting, I had the first closing of the fund at 105 crores, a fund which was initially targeted at 200 crores, but ended up at 240 crores.
That's an amazing story, Vikram. Uh, they say that one of the most important aspects of entrepreneurship is surrounding yourself with the right people. And I think even your story kind of brings that out, that how important it is to surround yourself with the right people and the right mentors as well. Apart from your family, and I'm sure you had your family around during that tough time as well, did you have anybody as a mentor, or were you taking somebody's advice during all of this time?
You know, I have had different mentors at different stages of my life.
Okay.
Uh, in my early career, my brother, who's 1.5 years older to me, has
Mm-hmm.
been a mentor. he's he pretty much guided me on, why I should go into a certain direction in terms of my education, etc.
Correct.
And then, of course, during my early years, there was a period that I had absolutely no mentor,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the early years of life. But that's one thing which I believe, is very, very critical in anybody's life, to have a mentor very early on in life. But when I started IvyCap,
Mm-hmm.
the first person I approached to come on board as my mentor, as a chairman, was Mr. G.K. Pillai, who's the former Home Secretary. In fact, he was the sitting Home Secretary at that time, and I walked into his office with just one idea.
Okay.
And I said, "Sir, I want you on board." And for a person of his stature, he obviously had to go through all kind of permissions, etc., right from the Prime Minister's office.
I'm sure.
So it was a process, but I kind of I wanted him to be on board, and I pursued him for some time. And as soon as he retired in August of 2011, he came on board the next day of his retirement. And right from that time, he's been my personal mentor to IvyCap, and has guided us along the whole journey.
No, and you've obviously benefited, and the business has benefited, I think, from his advice and his insights as well.
Absolutely. And then, of course, I realized that you need a set of mentors. You don't need just
Correct.
one, right? So we created an advisory board.
Mm-hmm.
People like Ashank Desai, who's the who's the founder of NASCOM, founder of Mastech. Pradeep Gupta, is a distinguished alumnus of IIT Delhi, founder of Pan IIT and Indian Angels Network, and
Of course.
then, of course, Ravi Dhariwal, who was the former CEO of Times of India. So we had lots of such people. And then, of course, we created a trust, IIT Alumni Trust, where we had the deans and the faculty of the IITs who came on the board of the Alumni Trust.
Okay.
Became mentors from the perspective of the entire ecosystem of the alumni.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, we actually created an actual mentor trust, where we now have about 65 mentors who actually are mentors to our portfolio companies, work very closely with them. So this mentoring model, we've now tried to institutionalize because of the experience I've had in my life. I believe that mentors are very critical for taking right decisions at the right time, because if you don't take that decision at the time when it matters,
Absolutely.
a lot of time and cost before you start correcting yourself.
So Vikram, I know that you're a huge believer in mentors as well. If somebody out there, and we've got people across the spectrum, we've got some CEOs that are watching the show right now, we've got some entrepreneurs as well. What would somebody look for in a mentor? How would somebody find a mentor?
Yeah, I think typically you look for, one is, of course, you look for somebody who understands you, right? I mean, a mentor could be someone who has a lot of experience, expertise,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't understand you, then, you may not get the right advice from the person.
Correct.
It is that they have to have time for you. I mean, there's somebody who might say that, look, I mean, it's a branded name, but if they're not able to give you time, then it's not really the value that you can get out of them.
Absolutely.
The point is, they should ideally be able to fill those gaps which you have. And many times entrepreneurs think that they know their business very well, and they understand their markets and all that. But when you have somebody who's been there, done that, and when they look at from the outsider's perspective and the kinds of questions they can ask, will be very different, and you learn a lot from those questions. So bridge those gaps, wherever you feel that gaps, whether in your own personality, gaps in the business that you're trying to build, and if you can find people who can help you with that. So I think that's the other important aspect, and of course somebody who can challenge you. I think I really believe in that doha, nindak nere rakhiye, reach high, right? And it
True.
Sabun pani bina nirbal kare chhoai. This is like the person who criticizes the most, is the person you should keep close to you.
However tough that might be.
That tough that might be, because in our meetings that we have every quarter, we get thrashed. The kind of questions that come up, and these are very draining board meetings. That at the end of the meeting, you feel that there's so many gaps, and many times you get stressed also during the meetings. That there's so many gaps you start seeing.
Correct.
Unless you have that kind of feedback, you will keep thinking that everything is going right, and you will never be able to correct yourself.
Absolutely.
So I truly believe in getting people on board who actually keep finding mistakes in you. And my brother is actually one of those examples who actually take anything good to him, and the first thing he will say, this is the mistake, and that's the mistake. So, yeah, these are the things which I think I would look for in a mentor.
No, I think very well articulated, Vikram. And we've already started getting a lot of interesting questions from the audience. But before we jump to them, I'd request the rest of the audience as well to just put your questions in the Q&A or the comment section, and I'll make sure that I have Vikram answer those. We've got plenty of time. So Vikram, if I was to ask you, where or who does your inspiration come from? You've had quite the journey, both professionally as a corporate leader, entrepreneur, and now investor. What are you inspired by?
I don't necessarily get inspired just by a person.
Okay.
I get inspired by characteristics in a person, right? So, I whoever I meet with, whoever I follow, I always look for characteristics in those people which are to be followed. So I think, if there was a new Twitter to be created based on the characteristics, I think that would do very well in my view, because that's something which people follow other people because they like certain characteristics in those people.
Correct.
Now, I'll give you examples. I won't necessarily name certain people, but there are people who have been icons in their industries, and may have had issues as well in their lives. And there are a few people, I've seen, and because of which they may have even fallen from their top positions in their careers that they would have gone to. And I even look at those people. In fact, I look at even those people more closely, that, what is it that brought them down? And, what mistakes they made, and what is it that they should not have done? So if you only look at successful people,
of course,
you miss out kind of things which you should not be doing. So I'm also tracking people who actually did extremely well in their careers.
correct.
And the most recent person is Rajat Gupta. I've been reading his book, and lots of lessons to be learned from his career. For example, his career was going really, really exemplary till the point things started going south. So when you look at a life like that, you realize that there are lessons to be learned in terms of what one should not do, despite achieving such heights in your careers. Of course, you look at people who have been extremely successful, and Warren Buffett is one person I really admire, and follow, and really understand, his style. And, Steve Jobs is another person who set examples. And these are the people who everybody follows. I think I'm not the only one, but I think these are examples where, and many of these people would have even failed in their careers and then gone up. Steve Jobs is that example. So I like to look for, how somebody's careers have shaped, and actually how they've come out of those situations, and how they've rebuilt their careers. And I think those have been very, very useful.
And Vikram, if I was to ask you one of the failures that you've gone through personally in your life, and something that you can take away from that we can learn from, what do you think that experience or that moment would be?
There have been, everybody has failures in their lives. The
True.
is whether they want to talk about it or not. My first few entrepreneurial experiences were failures, in the sense there were lots of assumptions I had made, and people, when you make assumptions without thoroughly researching on these things, very high that you will fail. So those are some of the learnings I have gathered.
Of course.
especially in my entrepreneurial journey, in the first entrepreneurship kind of a journey of my first project,
Mm-hmm.
I just thought I could do it myself. I had so much confidence in myself, and I just thought, while team I can build over time, but I'll just go into it and just execute it and I will build it myself. Of course, you need a team. You need a team who believes in you, who believes in the idea, who works along with you, who's has a similar vision as you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think working in a team is very, very critical, and that's something I learned early on. Then, of course, the other important learning is having enough capital bandwidth if you're taking a new journey. Of course, in my case, it worked out very well, fortunately.
Absolutely. Touch wood.
Yeah. So, but I think many times you don't plan it very well.
Correct.
That's what happened in my previous entrepreneurial, things, and where I kind of tried to just do something without planning my cash flows very well. People just think that it might happen, and they leave too much to luck. So I think that is not a good idea. So yeah, I think some of these things have been learnings from the early failures.
No, and definitely some valid takeaways from your experiences. Thank you for sharing, Vikram. IvyCap Ventures, a very interesting name. And I think you have a even more interesting philosophy because you tend to invest only in people that come from a pedigree background, so to speak, from the IITs and the IIMs. Uh, let's start with where the name came from, and then is that actually your philosophy, and how has that worked out?
Yeah, you picked up on something very, very interesting and important.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things which again comes from my learning is that when you do something, you should stand for it.
Correct.
And when you do something, you should be seen as something different. You have to do something differentiated. And when I was raising the fund, my first healthcare fund
Mm-hmm.
in 2008, the markets were really bad. The fund got raised primarily because, of course, one is the sponsor had a good brand name. The other thing is that, of course, it was a healthcare fund. So, I mean, a
Correct.
healthcare fund actually got sold because of the nature of the fund. But one of the biggest learnings during my fundraising experience there was that every time when I met an individual who came from an IIT, and since I'm from IIT Delhi, the connect was instant. I would have never met the person before.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment I started introducing myself, I'm from IIT Delhi, the person instantly started listening and started connecting, and we started, especially if the person was from the same IIT,
Of course.
with the professors from hostel to the canteens to everything. So effectively the connect happened instantly. And that actually started seeding an idea in my mind that, there has to be value put to this ecosystem, especially the IIT ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
An alumni ecosystem which has now almost about 400,000 people in that ecosystem needs to be structured through a common platform.
Okay.
Uh, there was nothing like that at that time, and even till date, there is no other parallel platform which could actually replicate this model. So when I thought of this idea, I said, ultimately, entrepreneurship is about connecting with entrepreneurs,
Of course.
connecting with investors on the other side, being able to identify good investment opportunities. And after you've invested in them, you should be able to add value in them. And you're not the only one who should be adding value. Bring a network support to add.
Absolutely.
And the best way to do it was to then bring this ecosystem together. And then in order to complete that value, the idea was that you actually, do it in such a way that whatever value you create,
Mm-hmm.
part of that you give back to the system. So
Correct.
that is how the whole idea was conceptualized. A platform was created, and the name Ivy came from the fact that initial thought process was that we'll just focus on the IIT alumni ecosystem. And that also had a story because even today, if you see the number of unicorns as an example in India,
Mm-hmm.
more than 30 unicorns, 15 of them come from just one campus of IIT, which is IIT Delhi. And over 22 unicorns come from all IITs put together. And there's a lot of data points which talk about the IIT entrepreneurs, etc. So it kind of did a story in terms of identifying those people and putting value in those. But then as we started doing our first fund, we realized that, there were a lot of institutional investors who got interested to invest in the fund.
Correct.
Banks and insurance companies in India. While they loved the idea, they didn't want to be seen as this is just favoring one kind of, educational institution. And this also made logical sense. Entrepreneurs, comes from anywhere. You would see people who may not even have gone to school are already running multiple companies already. And there are various examples of that. But we kind of decided that, in terms of a positioning, we will not shy away from saying that primary focus is going to be around the alumni ecosystem of the IITs, and then we added IIMs and a few other institutions.
Understood.
Which then kind of became very viral in itself, and because of the differentiation of the model and the way it was kind of, structured, everybody started talking about it. So we didn't have to really go and market the fund. We were able to raise the fund pretty quickly. And not only the first fund and the second fund as well. Most of our first fund investors came back and invested in the second fund. And now many of those investors are coming back and investing in a third fund as well.
Very nice. So what initially started as something that you would want to give back to the community and the tribe that you belong to has actually turned out to be a great marketing for the company as well.
Absolutely. And the interesting part is that it's not just, making the investments. I think the support system that gets created because of that.
Absolutely.
That is actually even more of value. And that is something which is, which I would say has been the biggest driver for this.
No, and you've lived in the States and you've studied in the States as well. And you see a lot of that from probably all of the Ivy Leagues. I mean, the top investment banks tend to prefer people from, the top 4 or the top 5 Ivy League universities in the country. So why should we be any different?
Yeah, that is true. I think at the same time, that doesn't mean that one should not, therefore, or one should exclude the people coming from other universities or schools. Therefore, I mean, if you look at a fund one, for example, we invested only in companies, and only 4 people were actually from IIT. Another 4 were from IIMs. So effectively 8 of 10 were IITs or IIMs. And 2 were neither IIT nor IIM. But interestingly, this is nothing to judge from. Of our 10 companies, the 2 which have done exceptionally well, of IIT Delhi. And, and I'm not saying that that would be the trend going forward as well. But I think there is a bit of, there is that entrepreneurship, aspect which comes from the culture of the institutions you go to, and therefore the ecosystem that gets built around that.
So I think all the entrepreneurs that are watching the show that are looking to pitch to IvyCap Ventures can heave a sigh of relief that while they may not get disqualified, their chances of getting invested in are better if they have a IIT alumni as part of the founding team.
Yeah, the good thing is that most of the entrepreneurs already know that now. So in fact, whenever we get those mailers, they always start with, I'm from this IIT and this batch. But as I said, even if you look at our fund 2 investments, there are quite a few people that are not neither IIT nor IIM, and they're doing quite well. I mean, they're doing exceptionally well. And one of them may actually become a unicorn, if things go well, and he's neither IIT nor IIM. It's, as I said, it's about building that support system, ecosystem. Therefore, the IIT angle is more from the support system rather than just selecting your investments.
Understood.